Welcome GRD 121 to exercise 5, Heart Clover. Now, if that sounds familiar, you might have worked with that in the Intro to Computing class, the CSC 103. I actually borrowed it from computer graphics to use in there to introduce vector graphics, but we're going to do a version here to kind of learn about anchor points. So that's going to be the purpose of this. So if it's simple, that's okay. It's a good way to learn about anchor points and the different types of points as well. So, and I'm going to show you some things with Illustrator as well to just compare. So let's get started. We're going to use a paper size just like we would in Illustrator. So I'm going to just choose US letter portrait from here. And it'll do it automatically in inches, and we already have the ruler out here. And what I'm going to do first to make a heart is I'm going to make it out of a circle. I know we usually start with the clover, but I'm going to start with the heart. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to use an ellipse, and I'm just going to draw an ellipse, any size. Not really worried about it. And then I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to double click in the size portion, and I'm going to unclick. I had this thing clicked, so let me unclick that. And that was locking it. So if I resize this, it would do the other one the same. So I'm going to make sure that's unlocked, and yours should be unlocked. But I'm going to double click here, and I'll make it 6 by 6. So I'm just going to put in a 6 and hit my tab key so it jumps over to the next field, and put 6 again, and then hit enter. And there it is, a 6 by 6 circle in inches. Make sure these are inches. And it's very easy to center it in the page by just using the align middle and the align center. Now it's centered in the page. So we have a circle right now, and it's an ellipse. Now it's not a path yet. Gravit treats this as a special type of almost a grouped path called an ellipse. And if you go to your sub-select tool, which is like the direct selection tool in Illustrator for manipulating anchor points, you won't see anchor points. These are the transform handles going around here, but you don't see anchor points. Now, it's hard to tell, but it's the typical box that you would see on anything. Now, what you have to do to make this a path so we could work with the anchor points is just use the squiggle. Again, that's not the technical term. It's called the convert to path, but I call it the squiggle because it looks like a backwards S. So I'm going to do that, and then you'll see it'll say path over here. So it's a path now, and as long as I'm on the sub-select tool, I can see my anchor points. There's one, and there's one, and there's one. There's 4 anchor points. Now, the point of this is to teach about anchor points. So if I click on one of these, I can select it, and you can see it shows up blue, and there's 2 direction handles that come out. We'll just call them handles for now. And if you go over here to where it says joints, now I'm calling them points, but Gravit calls them joints, probably because they're not allowed to call them points, because Adobe will sue them and they can't call them points anymore. They probably have the copyright on the word point. So they call them joints here, but they're anchor points. They're like the connectors of the line segment. So this is a curve point. There's 2 kinds of anchor points, connectors. They'll look all different ways with different handles and some without handles, but really there's a curve point and a corner point. That's it. Curve, corner. There's either a smooth change of direction or there's not. And these are smooth change of directions. If you go around here, these are all curve points. And if you notice, they're called asymmetrical, meaning their handles will kind of pull out differently. They're all the same as you go around. They're all asymmetrical. But there's 2 kinds of curve points in Gravit. There's a mirrored and there's asymmetric. And what that means is, just so you know, when I click on here, now all curve points, so they maintain a smooth transition between each segment. They work like a seesaw. I don't know if you guys know what a seesaw is, but it was this wooden thing on a playground where one person goes up and the other goes down. Well, that's what happens here. There's the seesaw. And when one goes up, the other goes down. So they're connected. They're like locked together. Now, why they're called asymmetric is because I could pull one out and the other will stay the same. So they work independently, not as far as where they go up and down, they're locked together, but just as far as pulling out. That's where the asymmetric comes in. If it was mirrored right here, now they don't call it symmetrical, they call it mirrored. If I clicked on mirrored, what happens now is if I pull one out, the other goes out in the same direction. So they stay symmetrical. So really the mirrored is symmetrical, the other one's called asymmetric. So that's what they are, but they're both curve points. They both have handles that work like seesaws, and they maintain a smooth change between them. I always kind of mention if this was like a track of a roller coaster, having a curve point makes sure that you won't jump off the track because it maintains a smooth connection between them, as opposed to a corner point. And I'll go down here and I'll make a corner point. I'll click on here, and if I use the one that basically sucks in the handles, it's called a straight point, but it's still a corner point. I'll click on there, and there's a point. So if this was a roller coaster and you're going around here, that's a very sharp change of direction. You'd probably go off the track. So and there's no smooth transition from one line segment to the other. Now you could tweak it a little to make that, but there's also no handles here. There's no direction handles coming out at all, so you can't really do anything except just move it around. So what we have here is a curve point which is currently mirrored. These are curve points which are currently asymmetric, because even though they're curve points, you could pull out a handle further from one side than the other. So on either side here, these are called asymmetric. And what I should do here, and I should tell you right off the bat, is let's save this if you haven't yet. And we're going to call this 5-Heart Clover. And I should have did that first thing, but of course I forgot. I wanted to jump right in with my heart. And I'll call it 5-Heart Clover. And I'll hit save, and that'll save it in the cloud. And just wait a second until it synchronizes. And there it is. So here's my path again. And again, we're talking about curve point, curve point, curve point, corner point. Now, another type of corner point, if I click on here, another type of corner point, they call it disconnected. Now, what it really is a corner point with handles that work independently. Disconnected means it's going to disconnect these handles. So the minute I go over here and click on disconnected, the handles will be disconnected. That means they're not locked together anymore. If I move one up, the other stays where it is. Now, obviously, you could still move the handles out different directions, but what we're going to do here, let me actually undo that. What I should do first is move this down. It's kind of squash it like that. And I'll start this over so you could do it, but I'm just kind of pointing out the anchor points right now. But with disconnected, you can move one up and the other can go up. So they work like old TV antennas, this kind of V shape here. You probably don't ever remember TVs with antennas like that, but they used to have antennas like that. I don't think radios did. Radios always, when I grew up, they always just had one single antenna coming out, like on a car, when cars used to have an antenna like on their hood. But these are like the old TV antennas coming out like that, the V shape. And now it's kind of looking like a heart, but that's called a corner point because, again, there's a sudden change of direction. If you were on a track and you came in here, you'd crash because it kind of changes directions and there's no smooth transition between the other line segment. If you went here and made it mirrored, now there would. Now you could go down here and slide down there. Now there's a little slope. If I went back and made it disconnected again, I could move this up. And now there's a sudden change of direction. So now we have corner point with handles, we have corner point without handles, and we have curve point, and they happen to be asymmetric because the handles work differently, but they're still curve points because they still work like a seesaw. So if there's a seesaw there, that's a curve point. If there's not a seesaw, it's a corner point. So that's all you need to remember. And I'm going to come back and do this over again, and you could do it with me. But let me just go to Illustrator for a second and just show you something. If I do this in Illustrator, I'll do the same thing. And if I made a 6x6 circle or ellipse, I could click on a page here. They have a way that you can actually type in 6x6. Now, I did this before. That's why 6x6 popped up. And if I hit OK. Now, if I want to move this to the center of the page, I have to go up here to my selection tool. There's the selection and direct selection, which is like the sub-select in Gravit. If I go to the selection tool, now I could physically move it, or I could go to my transform palette and I could kind of think, okay, center of the page is 4 1/4 if it's 8.5 by 11 page. So I have to numerically go in here and put 4.25, and I have to make sure that the center of the shape is selected. That's what this thing, there's a reference point here, so that this point is going to go in the middle of the page at 4 1/4 for the X, and then it's going to go 5.5 down. That's the center of a 8.5 by 11 page. All right, so now I just centered it. And now if I want to mess with the handles, now I don't have to break it apart in Illustrator. It's already a path. So if I use my direct selection tool, there's my anchor points. Now what's confusing in Illustrator is they're selected already. So if you go to grab one, it moves everything around. And you have to like undo. You have to always like kind of click off and then hover over and click on. So there's an anchor point, and that's a curve point because you move one up and the other goes down. It goes like that. Now they're always asymmetric in Illustrator. There's not, that I'm aware of, any way to make them mirrored because they're always separate so that one comes out and the other doesn't. So that's one thing I like about Gravit already. So this is a curve point. Now if I wanted to make this one down here a corner point and suck in the handles, I'd have to use a special tool. They have the convert tool, and I'd have to just know how to use it. I'd know that I click on a point with the convert tool, and that's how I do that. That's how I suck in the handles. And now if I wanted to move this down, I'd have to go back to my direct selection tool and move this point down and squash it like that. And I can move this up. Now if I wanted to move the other handle up, there's no button here to disconnect it. They have some buttons here that they started to add, but for years you always used to go over here and use the convert tool. And if you use the convert tool and grab on this, that would actually disconnect it, which again isn't really intuitive. And then the first thing you do is you try to grab it again and you're like, oh, wait a minute, what did I do? And that's because once you convert something, you got to get off the tool. And if you miss it, you get these messages coming up. So Illustrator can be very frustrating if you're not used to it, especially for beginners. It's not very beginner friendly, and I've been using it for years. And you got to get right on this little point here and then grab it up. And then you got to be like, okay, get off of that tool. And then you got to go back here and make sure you're back on your direct selection tool to do that. So in Illustrator, you know, it's a little tricky. These are curve points. They work like seesaws, but they're not symmetrical. And that's the way it was in Gravit, but there's no way to make any of these symmetrical that I'm aware of that I've ever done. So that's the heart in here, just showing you how to do it in Illustrator. Now let's get back to Gravit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right over. I'm going to go back here to my pointer. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to start right over. I'm going to go here and make a circle and make sure it's 6 by 6. Double click here, make it 6, and hit my tab key and make sure it highlights over there. And I'll hit 6 and I'll hit enter. So now it's 6 by 6, align middle, align center. That was easy. I'm going to go to my sub-select tool, make sure that we break this apart or that we convert it to path so that we see it as a path. Then we'll see our anchor points. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to move this down, kind of squash it like that, and then move this down like that. So it's like, I usually say it's like an alien head. I don't know if you can see that, but maybe you could see a face on here. It look like an alien head. And what I'm going to do now is suck in these handles. And I could do that by just making it straight joint. And that sucks in the handles. And what I'm going to do here is click on this point and drag the one up, and then use the disconnected and drag the other one up. So I converted it to disconnected so I could drag this other handle. Before that I can't because it's still a curve and then it would work like a seesaw. So I'm going to drag that up, and now it kind of looks like a heart. And I can move this down a little. And these things, you remember, you can move these around, you can rotate them, you could pull out the handle. So I'll make it look like a nice little heart here. And it doesn't have to be perfect because it's not easy to get it symmetrical. I'll move this down, and mine doesn't look perfect either. And if you want to move the whole thing, go back to your regular pointer. I'll move it up here. Now, one other thing I'll show you here with this heart is if you want to make like an S shape down here. Now, this has no handles, but if I go back to my sub-select tool and I click on here, I can make this disconnected. I'm going to make it disconnected, and it's going to look weird at first. It looks like it has like one of those chins, a cleft chin with a little divot in it. Now, what I'm going to do is grab this handle and move it up. Now, the reason I'm doing this is you see this S shape. I want you to get familiar with working with Bezier paths, is what they call these, because when you have one handle going in and one handle going out, they're controlling this line segment. So that's all we're worried about, is this line segment, and it's making an S shape by pulling one in and one out. So they're kind of pulling against each other. That's how it's making that S shape, which you're going to do a lot of times. And then same thing here. If I drag this up, now I have, and I'm just looking at this side of it. This is going in, this is going out, and it's making an S shape. And obviously the more I pull it out, the more I pull it in, the more drastic it gets. The closer you pull the handles in, the less of a curve you get. It gets more straighter. But the more you pull it out, the more of a curve. So now there's more fighting against each other here. So now we have more of a cartoon heart a little bit here with this kind of, this little S shape down here we're creating. Now I could click on here and make it straight again, and it would suck in the handles, but I'm going to leave it like this for now and just move it down. And that's all I'm going to do for this heart. I'll just give it a nice little gradient. I'll go down to the fill. I'll click in here and I'll change it to radial gradient, and it's white to black right now. So I'll make it go to red. That makes sense. And then maybe I'll make it go to orange. I'll click on this. Instead of white, I'll make it go to orange. I'm even going to move the orange over a little bit, and then I'm going to click right on here and then move this to the end. Now it's black right now, and I don't want it black, I want it white. So I'm going to make that white. Now I have a little white highlight, and I can move this over a little so they're not right next to each other. Now remember, when we were working with gradients, you have to move this thing. If you want this over like that, that's actually what I want to do. I want to move it up here just like we did with the original oval we created. And then you could always drag this and move it down and kind of scale that gradient. What I'd recommend is kind of keeping these on a 90-degree angle like that, even if you're turning it, because that way this is the width of it, that's the height of it. So if you want them the same, keep them on a 90-degree angle like that. Then you can still always move it around by grabbing this thing here. So I'm going to leave it like that, and I'll click off and click back on it. It's just getting rid of that color thing there. And then I'll add a border. I'll hit the plus sign here. I'll add a border. It's kind of hidden down here. And I'll go up just a little bit. It's like 7 point. 6 or 7 point is fine. I don't care what you do. 6 or 7. And then if you go to the options, you can make the stroke border, as they call it. In Illustrator, it's called a stroke. You can make it align to the outside. That's where they have position here. And you can make it go to the outside. So now it's on the outside of the path itself. So I'll just put that on the outside. And actually, it has kind of a straight point down here. Let me double check that. I'll click on this again, and I'll go to my border options. And the ends, let me do this. Let me click on this end here, because it's still making a straight point. And I'm not sure how Gravit handles that yet, but it's kind of making a straight point, and we could fix that later. But anyway, we may have to change the miter limit on it. If you increase this thing and make it go up, I think it makes a sharp point. So that's what we have to do there, change the miter limit. I wasn't sure if one of these settings would change it, but it looks like because it's such a sharp angle here, we have to do that. But again, not a big deal. Don't mean to get hung up on the miter limit here. That's all I want to do with the heart. And I'll go here on my page, and I'll change that page to be heart, because we'll just make 2 pages, because we're just going to make the clover next, and it's going to be easy. So I'm done with the heart. That's all I want. Gradient, heart. The whole purpose is just to cover the anchor points that we have here. Why don't you do a save? I'll do a save. I haven't done a save for a while. So let's take a break here, and we'll continue with our clover in part 2.